So, being in an electric bike business for about 10 years now, there's questions that come up all the time. And I just wanted to make one video to cover the most common ones. So I think I'll start this as like a part one, and maybe if there's more questions that come up, or if you have questions that I didn't ask that you think we should include in this sort of thing, maybe I can make a part two and add it in there. So the first question I'd like to answer used to come up all the time. It doesn't come up as much these days as people become more familiar with electric bikes and the technology, and they've gotten to have their own experience with them. But it's, should an electric bike be considered cheating? And from my opinion, which I guess this could only be considered an opinion, is no. I think different people can have different perspectives on this thing, but I think if you're racing, an electric bike should be considered cheating. You know, if you're pretending that you don't have an electric motor and, the other people don't have an electric motor. This actually happened, and I think that probably gave electric bikes a bad name a little bit, but I don't know that that's necessarily what we're talking about. I think we're talking about the general public and that you're losing some health benefits, or you're not really earning your spot to the top of the hill. I don't know. From my perspective, the more people get out on bikes, the better, and this is all a good thing, but yeah, that's how I would put it. I would just say no. So this next question is kind of related to the first one. It's, can I still get exercise riding an electric bike? And the answer is yes, absolutely. I mean, you should. I guess there's some types of electric bikes that have throttles, and they're kind of becoming less and less popular, but those types generally, you don't have to work so much. Some people will pedal with the throttle, but you have the option to not pedal. So in that instance, maybe you're less likely to get exercise. We're a big proponent of pedal assist bikes. I mean, that's all that we offer in our shops. But in that case, you're always pedaling. You have to pedal. You have control over how much you pedal. But from my perspective, and what I've seen in experience, is that people end up getting out on their bike a lot more often because they have a little bit more control over how much energy they put into the electric bike. And, if you're in a place that has big hills or something like that, you might be intimidated. Say, hey, I don't want to go out today because I have to go up this big hill to get where I want to go. But with the electric bike, you could say, okay, well, I have the power to get there. And then maybe once I go over the hill, I'm not really using the power so much. There's a lot of studies on this. There's a lot of data on this. But the reality is that most people get exercise. And if you actually look at it from a big picture, people end up getting more exercise because they end up riding more. That's in simple terms what most of the data and the studies have shown. And that's kind of been my personal experience, and I think that's been a lot of my customers' experience. So I wonder, what's been your experience? Now, this next question can vary depending on where you're located in the world, but I will note that we're in the U.S. But this question is, how fast can an electric bike go? I mean, in theory, there's not really too much limits. There's limits to the parts and that sort of thing. But generally speaking, we're going to see limits based on the jurisdictional laws that exist. Now, here in the U.S., most electric bikes will go either 20 miles an hour or 28 miles an hour in special instances. But in other places in the world, something that's more common is maybe 15 miles an hour. Some places like Japan, I think it's 12 miles an hour is the top speed. And, this is going to vary. Now, you might see some other claims out there oh, this electric bike goes 50 miles an hour. Is it still considered a bicycle at that point? From my perspective, it's probably considered more like an electric motorcycle. It's certainly not considered a legal electric bike in the U.S. or most jurisdictions throughout the world. Yeah, to put it simply, it's somewhere between 15 and 28 miles an hour. Or in special instances like Japan, 12 miles an hour. And I kind of just covered this one just a moment ago, but this question comes up all the time. Do I have to pedal? Now, if it has a throttle, you don't have to pedal. Basically, you can sit on the bike and just twist the throttle or push the throttle lever and just moves along pretty easily. This is becoming a little bit less common, as what I'm seeing more and more is this technology called pedal assist. And basically, the pedal assist just assists you as you pedal. So you always have to pedal, but you don't really have to pedal a lot, especially when you use the higher levels of assistance. The benefit to this is you're always getting exercise, and it's a lot more efficient. And generally, the higher quality motor systems are going to be the pedal assist ones. So might be something to consider if this is really important to you, that I want an electric bike that I don't have to to pedal, you might be limiting your choices and eliminating some of the better quality options that are available on the market. Okay, next question. How much do they cost? Now, this can vary all over the place. I mean, I've seen electric bikes for as cheap as $300 on Amazon and that sort of thing. But I've seen electric bikes go up to $50,000 in the most extreme cases, and that's really extreme. Mostly what we see is somewhere between $1,000 and $10,000 to $12,000 in some like really special bikes out there. And most of the bikes that we sell in our shop range generally somewhere between $3,000 and $6,000, and that might be slightly higher than what some other shops do, but we really focus on the best quality that's out there. So it really depends. You're going to see some different changes as the electric bikes move to these different price points, and starting out with these like $300 bikes, you're going to see like very cheap parts on it, very proprietary. It's kind of a little bit more like a scooter, that sort of thing. And then as you move up, you start to see a little bit better quality, starts to look a little bit more like a bicycle. Another common question is, how much do they weigh? And this also can be all over the map. But I've seen bikes start somewhere around 30 pounds on the lower weight side of things. Maybe there's some out there that are a little bit lighter, and go upwards of over 100 pounds in the case of electric cargo bikes and that sort of thing. So it really depends, but I'd say most electric bikes generally fall somewhere in the like high 40 pound to mid 60 pound range. You know, a lot of that weight's coming from the battery and the motor, but a lot of times other components on the bike can be reinforced and enhanced, and there's other features that might be included on these bikes to make them more comfortable or, you know, offer more utility and that sort of thing. So these can tend to add weight to them. Next question. Where are they manufactured? Now, like a lot of my other answers, you might be seeing a trend here. This varies. Historically, a lot of electric bikes, or probably the majority of electric bikes, were manufactured in China. China happened to have the largest market for electric bikes for their actual domestic market. So we've seen a lot of the products which were manufactured for the domestic market in China actually come to other markets like the US and Europe and that sort of thing. And I imagine some of the people that might be watching this video. But actually the bike industry in general, there's a lot of shifts that have happened in previous years where a lot of the manufacturing went from China to Taiwan, and Taiwan has become kind of a special place for bike manufacturing in Asia, and we see a lot of electric bikes come from Taiwan. But there's also many manufacturers in Europe. That's probably, outside of Asia, that's probably the most common thing that you might see, is that there's many manufacturers in Germany. Now we're seeing a lot of manufacturing for bike frames actually happening in Portugal now. Other places like that. We work with another manufacturer that builds their bikes in France, the Netherlands, in Copenhagen. It's really all over the place. We found that the quality can vary quite a bit as well when you're looking at these different manufacturers. But it's not always the case that it's just where the manufacturer is located. I'm sure, as many of you may know these days, you know, we operate in this kind of global marketplace and global manufacturing, and it's really about how these places are managed and what the process is and what the engineering is behind these different facilities and that sort of thing. Don't necessarily be convinced just because a bike was manufactured in a specific place that it's going to be this quality, although that might be one of the early indicators of quality. From my shop specifically, we primarily work with companies that manufacture from Europe, but we do have a couple of suppliers that manufacture their bikes in Taiwan. Those ones, they have a very specific oversight, and they actually operate there as well. We've been pretty impressed with the quality, so again, don't take the location as a pure indicator for what the quality of that electric bike is going to be. One other important topic in relation to where a bike is manufactured is standards. Now, I should note that there are not really any specific standards for quality or testing or that sort of thing throughout the world. However, in Europe, there are many standards which are developed and required by many of the manufacturers and their insurance providers and that sort of thing, that they meet these certain standards. So We're a big proponent of this, so we really like working with manufacturers that do have certain testing protocols and that sort of thing in place, because some of the manufacturers, unfortunately, they just don't. So the next question is one that we really like to answer. It's, can I carry a passenger or can I carry kids on my electric bike? And although some places they might have different laws and rules around this, the answer, generally speaking, is yes. And fortunately, there's many bikes that are specifically made to do this. We actually happen to specialize in offering these bikes. They're generally called cargo bikes or cargo electric bikes. We have a variety of different options, and you can carry 1 kid, 2 kids, sometimes 3 or even 4 in some instances. You can carry a full-size adult, really, if you wanted to. So it's pretty amazing what is possible. And also, I guess, thinking in that cargo side of things, it kind of extends the utility of the bike, that it might be more competitive with a automobile. Okay, so this next question is related to legality, and we actually did a whole video on the legality topic. You might want to check that out. But it's, do I need a license and insurance to ride an electric bike? Now, I'm going to answer this question specific in the U.S., but some of these rules might be a little bit different outside of the U.S. For the most part, the answer is no. You don't need any special license. You don't need any special insurance. And for the most part, electric bike, particularly in the U.S., is just considered a traditional bicycle. This can vary in some jurisdictions and certainly can vary when you go outside of the U.S., particularly in Europe. Actually, if you have one of these high-speed electric bikes, that can go 28 miles an hour or 45 kilometers per hour, you might need a special moped license. It means technically considered something like a moped. For the most part, you don't need any special license or insurance, but I do recommend that people are familiar with the rules of the road, and it might be a good idea to get insurance, not necessarily just to insure your liability and that sort of thing, but also for theft. That could be really helpful. So this next question is kind of related to the legality thing, and we did go a little bit deeper into this in that video I mentioned before, but it's, where can I ride my electric bike? And similar to what I mentioned before, I mean, you could pretty much ride or treat your electric bike like a traditional bicycle for those standard 20-mile-an-hour ones. There could be some instances with the 28-mile-an-hour ones, or particularly the throttle-activated bikes, that there might be certain regulations on where you can ride them. For example, some bike paths, they might not allow them and that sort of thing. So it's important to be mindful of that. But for the most part, you can ride an electric bike anywhere you can ride a traditional bike, which is pretty nice. Historically, there's been some restrictions around this, but that's really loosening up quite a bit as education is improving, as people are getting more familiar with the technology and that sort of thing. In the future, it'll be more clear. So another important question that comes up all the time is, how can I transport my electric bike? And can I take it on a plane? So first, transporting electric bike, it's really not all that much different than a normal bike. However, if you're putting on a car rack, you have to note that the electric bike can weigh a little bit more than a normal non-electric bike. I would recommend removing the battery. That's going to help you save a little bit of weight there. Generally speaking, you might want to look into a special rack that's specifically made to carry electric bikes, because many of them can be over 40 pounds or so, upwards of 50, 60 pounds in many instances. You can remove the battery. That might save you 6 pounds or so. Generally speaking, the hitch-mounted racks will work the best, but there might be other trunk racks that you can kind of figure out your way to do that. My general recommendation is a hitch-mounted rack or carry it inside the vehicle. There are other ways you might want to transport the electric bike as well, maybe taking it on a train, perhaps put it on a bus, for example. One thing to note about that, and this has been brought up from other commenters that transport their electric bike on a bus often, is the tire size can be an important detail, because those racks can have different sizes and that sort of thing. So if you have really wide tires or a really long bike, you might have trouble with that. So just be mindful of that and do a bit of research if that's considered an important part of your purchase or selection on an electric bike. The most common one that actually comes up as a question, because it's a little bit confusing and it's definitely important to note, is transporting an electric bike on a plane. Now, you are technically allowed to bring the bike on the plane. There might be some special fees, and you're generally going to want to put it inside of a special box. However, you generally can't take an electric bike battery on a plane. Now, this is part of an international regulation where you can't take anything that's over 100 watt hours. There are very few electric bikes, or really not much of any that I'm aware of, that have 100 watt hour batteries. Most of them are at least 300 watt hours and generally 4, 5, or more 100 watt hours. So that's not going to meet that regulation, so you can't take that battery on the plane. And you might be wondering, what do I do with that? How do I deal with that? It's kind of a challenging thing. I want to take my bike on a trip with me. There's a couple different options. One, you can ship the whole bike with the battery and everything to that specific place. It might cost a bit of money to do so. You can take the bike on the plane and then ship the battery. Or in some instances, you might even be able to rent a battery in your destination. This is really helpful if you have a popular battery, one that's a little bit more common. For example, if you had a Bosch battery, this is something that we actually bring up a lot because we primarily work with Bosch, is that throughout Europe there's actually many dealers with Bosch, and some of them might be willing to actually rent you a battery while you're in town. And we've actually done this with people that were visiting our specific city from other places. They bring their bike along, we rent them a battery, they use it while they're staying there, and then, give it back to us, that sort of thing. It's a really nice option. Well, I hope you guys found this video to be helpful. If you have other questions you think that I should have answered, maybe we can cover them in a future video, as I mentioned before. So leave them in the comments below, and I'll try to answer them quickly in the comments, but I'll try to address them more comprehensively in a future video as a part 2, if you will. Well, hope you enjoyed, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Well, see you soon.